True Worth, a dramatic story. Maggie Collins was a woman who lived her life with quiet dignity. She didn't wear designer clothes, nor did she carry expensive handbags or adorn herself with flashy jewelry. Her simplicity wasn't born out of necessity, but out of choice. To Maggie, true worth wasn't about appearances. It was about kindness, humility, and treating others with respect. Her values were unshakable, and they defined her character. Her husband, James Collins, was the epitome of success. A self-made billionaire, James had built his empire from nothing, relying on hard work and perseverance to achieve greatness. Despite his immense fortune, James remained humble, never allowing wealth to change his values or the way he treated people. Together, Maggie and James lived modestly, finding joy in the little things that mattered most: love, family, and integrity. But even in their quiet lives, Maggie wanted to show James how much she appreciated him. For years, James had admired luxury cars, but had never indulged himself in owning one. He always said that material possessions were fleeting and unnecessary. Yet Maggie knew how hard he worked and how much he deserved something special, a gift that would symbolize her gratitude for all he had done for her. A fateful morning. One sunny morning, Maggie decided to act on her plan. She dressed in her usual attire, a simple dress paired with comfortable shoes, and drove to one of the city's most prestigious car dealerships. The dealership was renowned for its collection of luxury vehicles, sleek sports cars, and elegant sedans that gleamed under showroom lights like jewels on display. As Maggie entered the dealership, her heart raced with excitement. She imagined James's reaction when she surprised him with the car he had always admired. But as she stepped inside the showroom, she felt the weight of judgmental stares almost immediately. Blake Thompson, the dealership manager, noticed Maggie as soon as she walked through the glass doors. Blake was a man who prided himself on identifying wealthy clients at a glance. His tailored suit and polished demeanor reflected his belief that appearances were everything. He judged people based on how they looked rather than who they were. To Blake, Maggie didn't belong there. "Good morning," Maggie greeted warmly as she approached him. Her voice carried a tone of quiet confidence despite the intimidating atmosphere of the showroom. Blake's practiced smile faltered as his eyes swept over her outfit, the plain dress and worn shoes that told him everything he thought he needed to know about her financial situation. "I'd like to see some of your cars," Maggie said cheerfully. Blake raised an eyebrow before responding with a smirk. "I'm afraid we don't have anything here that fits your budget." Maggie blinked in surprise, but remained composed. "I haven't mentioned my budget yet," she replied politely. Blake chuckled softly as if she had made a joke. "I think it's safe to assume," he said dismissively before signaling to a security guard nearby. "Please escort this lady out." The humiliation was sharp and immediate. Maggie felt her cheeks flush as other customers glanced at her briefly before turning away indifferently. She stood frozen for a moment, stunned by Blake's words and actions. But instead of arguing or making a scene, Maggie turned and walked out of the dealership with her head held high. As she stepped back into her car, tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Not because of the rejection itself, but because of how quickly people judged others based solely on appearances. The pain of being judged. That evening at home, Maggie sat across from James at their dining table and recounted what had happened at the dealership earlier that day. Her voice was steady as she described Blake's dismissive attitude and how he had judged her without knowing anything about her or her intentions. James listened intently, his expression calm but thoughtful. When Maggie finished speaking, he reached across the table and gently took her hand in his own. "You've done nothing wrong," James said reassuringly. His voice carried an edge of resolve as he added, "People like that often judge others without understanding their true worth." Then he smiled, a knowing smile that hinted at something more, but didn't elaborate further. "Don't worry about it," he said simply. "I'll handle this." Maggie wasn't sure what James meant by those words, but she trusted him completely. An unexpected arrival. The next morning at the dealership began like any other day for Blake Thompson. He strutted around confidently in his tailored suit, greeting well-dressed clients and ignoring anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of wealth or success. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the showroom as a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up outside. Its presence alone commanded attention. Every head turned to look at the magnificent vehicle as it glided to a stop right in front of the dealership's entrance. The car's glossy finish reflected sunlight like a mirror, exuding power and prestige. When the driver's door opened, a tall man stepped out wearing an impeccably tailored suit. His posture was commanding, his movements deliberate. It was James Collins, a name that carried weight in business circles worldwide. Blake's jaw dropped as he recognized the billionaire stepping into his dealership unannounced. But what happened next shocked him even more. From the passenger side of the Rolls-Royce emerged Maggie, the same woman Blake had dismissed so rudely just a day earlier. She was dressed just as simply as before, but walked with an air of quiet confidence that made everyone pause. Blake felt his palms grow sweaty as James and Maggie approached him together. "Mr. Collins." Blake stammered nervously, forcing a smile onto his face. "It's such an honor to have you here today. How can I assist you?" James looked at Blake with calm, yet piercing eyes before speaking in a measured tone. "My wife came here yesterday," he began slowly but firmly. "She wanted to buy me a car as a surprise gift." He paused for effect as everyone in the room listened intently. "But instead of helping her, you judged her based on how she looked and turned her away." Blake's face turned pale as whispers spread among staff and customers alike. I didn't realize," Blake stuttered helplessly. James raised a hand to silence him. "You didn't realize because you didn't care enough to look beyond appearances." Maggie stepped forward then, her voice kind but resolute. "I don't hold grudges," she said softly. "But I hope this experience teaches you something important. Never underestimate someone based on how they look." James nodded in agreement before turning back to Blake one last time. "We won't be buying anything from you today." With that, James offered Maggie his arm, and together they walked out of the dealership without another word. This dramatic story highlights how quickly people can judge others based on superficial qualities, and serves as a reminder that true worth lies far deeper than appearances or wealth alone. The pain of being judged. Maggie Collins had always believed in the value of kindness and respect. Her life was built on the principle that people should be treated with dignity, regardless of their background or appearance. But on one fateful day, she found herself at the receiving end of something she had never expected, being judged and dismissed solely because of how she looked. A moment of excitement turned sour. It was a bright morning when Maggie decided to visit a luxury car dealership. Her heart was filled with excitement as she envisioned surprising her husband, James, with a gift, a car he had always admired but never bought for himself. James was a self-made billionaire, but he lived modestly, just like Maggie. They both valued simplicity over extravagance, and Maggie's attire that day reflected her lifestyle, a plain dress and comfortable shoes. As she stepped into the dealership, Maggie felt a surge of optimism. The showroom was dazzling. Sleek sports cars and polished sedans gleamed under the bright lights. She imagined James's reaction when he saw the car she planned to buy for him. But her excitement quickly faded as she noticed the cold stares directed her way. Blake Thompson, the dealership manager, was the first to notice Maggie. His sharp suit and confident demeanor exuded authority, but his eyes betrayed judgment as they scanned her outfit. To him, appearances were everything, and Maggie's simple attire didn't align with his idea of a serious buyer. "Good morning," Maggie greeted warmly as she approached Blake. "I'd like to take a look at some of your cars." Blake's practiced smile faltered as he assessed her from head to toe. "I'm afraid we don't have anything here that fits your budget," he replied with a smirk. Maggie blinked in surprise, but remained composed. "I haven't mentioned my budget yet," she said politely. Blake chuckled softly, shaking his head as if she had made a joke. "I think it's safe to assume," he said dismissively before signaling to a nearby security guard. "Please escort this lady out." The humiliation hit Maggie like a wave. She felt her cheeks flush as other customers glanced at her briefly before turning away indifferently. Without arguing or making a scene, she turned and walked out of the dealership with her head held high. But inside, her heart ached, not because of the rejection itself, but because of how quickly people judged others based solely on appearances. The weight of judgment. As Maggie drove home, the pain of the experience lingered in her mind. She replayed Blake's words over and over again. "We don't have anything here that fits your budget." The assumption stung not because it was untrue. Maggie could afford any car in that showroom, but because it revealed how shallow and dismissive people could be. Judgment based on appearance is one of society's oldest vices. Studies have shown that humans are wired to make snap judgments about others within seconds of meeting them. These judgments are often influenced by stereotypes perpetuated by media and culture, associations between beauty and success, or simplicity and incompetence. For Maggie, this societal bias manifested in Blake's behavior. He saw her plain dress and immediately assumed she didn't belong. But appearances are deceptive. They reveal little about who we are, our values, or our capabilities. Yet people like Blake rely on these surface-level cues to determine someone's worth, a practice that can lead to unfair treatment and missed opportunities. The emotional toll. Maggie's experience at the dealership wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of how judgment based on appearance can deeply affect individuals on an emotional level. Research shows that being judged negatively for one's appearance can lead to feelings of shame, isolation, and self-doubt. Although Maggie was strong enough to hold her head high in the moment, the sting of rejection lingered long after she left. Judging someone based on their looks doesn't just hurt their feelings, it can erode their confidence over time. For many people, repeated experiences like Maggie's can lead to social anxiety or even depression. They begin to internalize the negative perceptions others project onto them, questioning their own worth and abilities. For Maggie, however, this moment wasn't about self-doubt. It was about disappointment in others. She had always believed in treating people with respect and fairness, yet here she was being dismissed without so much as a chance to explain herself. Why do we judge? The question lingered in Maggie's mind. Why do people judge others so quickly? The answer lies in human psychology. From an evolutionary perspective, quick judgments based on appearance helped our ancestors assess threats and opportunities in their environment. Traits like facial symmetry or posture were often linked to health or strength, qualities essential for survival. But in modern society, these instincts have evolved into biases that serve no constructive purpose. Instead of assessing someone's character or capabilities, we judge them based on arbitrary standards set by media and culture. Advertisements link beauty with success. Movies portray attractive characters as heroes, while less attractive ones are cast as villains. These stereotypes shape our perceptions from a young age, making it harder for us to see beyond appearances. Blake's behavior at the dealership was a textbook example of this societal bias at work. He didn't see Maggie for who she truly was, a kind-hearted woman with more than enough means to buy any car in his showroom. Instead, he saw only her plain dress and assumed she wasn't worth his time. A silent strength. That evening at home, Maggie recounted the incident to James over dinner. Her voice was steady as she described what had happened, the dismissive tone in Blake's voice, the smirk on his face when he assumed her budget couldn't match his car's. James listened intently, his expression calm but thoughtful. When Maggie finished speaking, he reached across the table and gently took her hand. "You've done nothing wrong," James said reassuringly. People like that often judge others without understanding their true worth. His words comforted Maggie but also sparked something deeper, a quiet resolve not to let this experience define her or diminish her belief in kindness and respect. A universal struggle. Maggie's story is not unique. Countless individuals face similar experiences every day simply because they don't fit society's narrow definitions of success or attractiveness. Whether it's being overlooked for a job opportunity or treated unfairly in social settings, judgment based on appearance is a pervasive issue that affects people across all walks of life. But stories like Maggie's also serve as reminders of why it's important to challenge these biases. Judging someone based on their looks may be instinctual, but it doesn't make it right or accurate. True worth lies far deeper than appearances. It resides in our actions, our values, and how we treat others. For Maggie, this painful experience would soon become an opportunity, not just to prove Blake wrong, but to reaffirm what she already knew. True worth cannot be measured by what we wear or how we look. It is defined by who we are inside. Conclusion. The pain of being judged is universal. It cuts deep because it questions our very identity. But while experiences like Maggie's can be hurtful, they also offer opportunities for growth and reflection. By refusing to let judgment define us, and by treating others with kindness regardless of appearances, we can begin to dismantle these harmful biases one interaction at a time. An unexpected arrival. The morning sun bathed the city in golden light as Blake Thompson, the the manager of Boston Luxury Motors, adjusted his navy blue tie and prepared for another day of business. Blake prided himself on being able to spot serious buyers the moment they walked through the door. His sharp suit and polished demeanor reflected his belief that appearances were everything. To him, wealth had a look, and he could identify it at a glance. The previous day had been uneventful, save for one incident that lingered in his mind. A woman dressed in plain clothes, a simple dress and worn shoes, had walked into the dealership asking about one of their most expensive models. Blake had dismissed her outright, assuming she was just another dreamer who couldn't afford even the cheapest car in the showroom. He had made it clear to her, in no uncertain terms, that she didn't belong there. Blake smirked to himself as he recalled the encounter. People like that, he thought, should know their place. But today would be different. Today, something unexpected was about to happen, something that would shake Blake's confidence to its core. A showroom interrupted. The dealership was bustling with activity as customers browsed the gleaming rows of luxury vehicles. Blake was in his element, guiding a well-dressed couple toward a sleek azure coupe when a low rumble echoed through the showroom. Heads turned as a black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop right outside the glass doors. The car was immaculate, its glossy finish reflecting the sunlight like a mirror. It exuded power and prestige, commanding attention without a single word. The air inside the showroom grew tense with anticipation as everyone waited to see who would step out of such an extraordinary vehicle. The driver's door opened first, and out stepped a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit. His posture was commanding, his movements deliberate. There was something about him, an aura of authority that made people instinctively stand straighter and speak softer. Blake's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the man, James Collins, one of the wealthiest individuals in the region and a name that carried weight in both business and philanthropy circles. Blake had never met James personally, but knew of his reputation, a self-made billionaire who valued integrity above all else. As James adjusted his cufflinks and surveyed the dealership with calm intensity, Blake straightened his tie and prepared to greet him. This was an opportunity he couldn't afford to mess up. But then, something happened that made Blake's stomach drop. From the passenger side of the Rolls-Royce emerged Maggie, the same woman he had dismissed so rudely just a day earlier. She was dressed just as simply as before, but this time she walked with an air of quiet confidence that made everyone pause. Blake froze in place as realization dawned on him. Maggie wasn't just anyone. She was James Collins's wife. A confrontation unfolds. James and Maggie entered the showroom together, their presence commanding attention from everyone inside. The room fell silent as customers and staff alike watched them approach Blake. "Mr. Collins." Blake stammered nervously, forcing a smile onto his face. "It's such an honor to have you here today. How can I assist you?" James looked at Blake with calm, yet piercing eyes before speaking in a measured tone. "My wife came here yesterday," he began slowly but firmly. "She wanted to buy me a car as a surprise gift." Blake's face turned pale as whispers spread among staff and customers alike. But instead of helping her, James continued, "You judged her based on how she looked and turned her away." The weight of James's words hung heavily in the air. Blake opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. I didn't realize," he stuttered helplessly. James raised a hand to silence him. "You didn't realize because you didn't care enough to look beyond appearances," he said simply. Maggie stepped forward then, her voice kind but resolute. "I don't hold grudges," she said softly. "But I hope this experience teaches you something important. Never underestimate someone based on how they look." Blake felt his palms grow sweaty as guilt washed over him. He wanted to apologize, to explain himself, but no words came out. A silent lesson. As James and Maggie walked past him toward one of the cars on display, Blake stood frozen in place, grappling with what had just happened. Around him, murmurs filled the room as customers whispered about the confrontation they had just witnessed. James stopped briefly beside one of the salesmen, a young man named Daniel who had tried to assist Maggie the day before but had been overruled by Blake. "Thank you for treating my wife with respect yesterday," James said quietly. Daniel nodded nervously but couldn't hide the small smile of satisfaction that crept onto his face. James turned back toward Maggie and offered her his arm. Together, they walked out of the dealership without purchasing anything. Not because they couldn't afford it, but because they chose not to reward an establishment that judged people so unfairly. A ripple effect. Word of what had happened spread quickly among staff and customers alike. For some, it was a moment of vindication, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving and that true worth wasn't measured by outward displays of wealth or status. For Blake Thompson, however, it was a wake-up call he couldn't ignore. The humiliation he felt wasn't just about being called out by James Collins. It was about realizing how shallow his own values had become. Over time, Blake began reflecting on how often he had treated people unfairly simply because they didn't fit his narrow definition of success or wealth. Determined to change, he started volunteering at local community centers and participating in outreach programs aimed at helping underprivileged individuals find opportunities for growth and success. Slowly but surely, he began rebuilding not just his reputation but also his character, learning that true worth wasn't about appearances or possessions, but about integrity and kindness. Conclusion. The unexpected arrival of James Collins and his wife Maggie served as more than just a dramatic moment. It was a powerful lesson for everyone involved. It reminded them that judgment based on appearances is not only unfair, but also deeply flawed, and that true worth lies far deeper than what meets the eye. For those who witnessed it firsthand, it was an unforgettable experience, a story they would carry with them for years to come as a reminder to always look beyond the surface when assessing someone's value or potential. A lesson learned. The weight of a mistake. Blake Thompson, the manager of Boston Luxury Motors, had always prided himself on his ability to identify wealthy clients at a glance. To him, appearances were everything. He believed he could determine someone's worth simply by the clothes they wore, the cars they drove, and the way they carried themselves. It was this confidence, this arrogance, that had led him to make the biggest mistake of his career. The day Maggie Collins walked into his showroom dressed in a simple dress and worn shoes, Blake dismissed her without a second thought. He assumed she couldn't afford anything in his dealership and rudely sent her away. What he didn't know was that Maggie was the wife of James Collins, one of the wealthiest men in the region, a billionaire whose reputation for humility and generosity was as well known as his financial success. Blake's snap judgment would cost him more than just a sale. It would cost him his pride and force him to confront the flaws in his character. The arrival that changed everything. The day after Blake dismissed Maggie, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up outside Boston Luxury Motors. The car was immaculate, its presence commanding attention from everyone in the showroom. When the driver's door opened, James Collins stepped out, exuding authority and confidence. But it was when Maggie emerged from the passenger side that Blake's heart sank. As James and Maggie walked into the dealership together, Blake immediately realized who Maggie was and who he had insulted. His stomach churned as he replayed the events of the previous day in his mind. He had judged Maggie based on her appearance, failing to see her true worth. James approached Blake with calm, yet piercing eyes. "My wife came here yesterday," he began slowly but firmly. "She wanted to buy me a car as a surprise gift." Blake opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. But instead of helping her, James continued, "You judged her based on how she looked and turned her away." The weight of James's words hung heavily in the air. Blake felt every eye in the showroom on him as he stood frozen in place. I didn't realize," Blake stammered helplessly. James raised a hand to silence him. "You didn't realize because you didn't care enough to look beyond appearances," he said simply. Maggie stepped forward then, her voice kind but resolute. "I don't hold grudges," she said softly. "But I hope this experience teaches you something important. Never underestimate someone based on how they look." A humbling experience. For Blake, this moment was more than just humiliating. It was transformative. As James and Maggie walked out of the dealership without purchasing anything, Blake felt the sting of regret wash over him. He realized that his behavior had not only cost him a significant sale, but also revealed deep flaws in his character. Blake spent days reflecting on what had happened. He thought about why he had judged Maggie so harshly and why he had assumed she wasn't worth his time. The answer wasn't flattering. He had been blinded by superficial values, prioritizing appearances over substance. It wasn't just Maggie who suffered because of his judgment. Blake himself had missed an opportunity to connect with someone kind and genuine, a person whose values could have enriched his own perspective. A path to redemption. Determined to change, Blake decided to take action. He reached out to James Collins personally, asking for an opportunity to make amends. To Blake's surprise, James didn't dismiss him outright, but instead offered him a chance to learn from his mistake. The Collins Foundation is hosting a benefit gala next month, James explained. It's for an adaptive sports complex for children with disabilities. We always need extra hands, volunteers who can help set up and assist the children. Blake stiffened at the implication. This wasn't about business anymore. It was about learning a fundamental lesson in human value. James continued. You'll see firsthand what kindness and respect can achieve when appearances are set aside. Blake agreed reluctantly, but knew it was necessary if he wanted to rebuild his reputation and himself. The lesson takes root. At the gala, Blake worked alongside volunteers from all walks of life, teachers, parents, athletes, all united by their desire to make a difference for children with disabilities. He helped set up equipment, assisted children during activities, and watched as families connected over shared experiences. What struck Blake most was how little anyone cared about appearances. People weren't judged by their clothes or their cars. They were valued for their actions, their willingness to help, and their ability to show compassion. For the first time in years, Blake felt humbled. He saw how much he had missed by focusing on superficial markers of success rather than deeper qualities like kindness and empathy. A changed man. Over time, Blake began incorporating what he learned into his daily life at Boston Luxury Motors. He worked with his team to revamp how they treated customers. No more judging by appearance or making assumptions based on superficial traits. Every customer was treated with respect and dignity, regardless of how they looked or what they wore. Blake also started volunteering regularly at community events hosted by the Collins Foundation. The work wasn't glamorous. It involved long hours and physical effort, but it was deeply rewarding. Each event reminded him that true worth isn't about wealth or status. It's about how we treat others when no one is watching. A reward greater than wealth. Months later, James Collins returned to Boston Luxury Motors, not as a critic, but as a client. He approached Blake directly with an offer. We're still looking to replace our corporate fleet, James said calmly. Perhaps you could handle that transaction. Blake's eyes widened in disbelief. Me? He asked hesitantly. Daniel speaks highly of you, James replied simply. Blake exhaled deeply, humbled by the trust James placed in him despite everything that had happened before. This sale would smash quarterly targets for Boston Luxury Motors. But for Blake Thompson, it meant far more than financial success. It was proof that redemption is possible when we confront our flaws and commit to change. Conclusion. Blake's journey from arrogance to humility serves as a powerful reminder of what truly matters in life. Kindness over judgment, empathy over appearances, sincerity over superficiality. His mistake cost him millions, but taught him lessons worth far more. Lessons about human value that transformed not only his career, but also his character. In the end, true worth isn't measured by wealth or status. It's defined by how we treat others, with respect, compassion, and genuine care, even when no one important is watching. Message: the true meaning of worth. Introduction: a universal truth. The story of Maggie Collins and her husband James serves as a compelling reminder of a universal truth. True worth cannot be measured by appearances, wealth, or social status. It is defined by character, by kindness, empathy, and the way we treat others. This message resonates deeply because it challenges the superficial values that often dominate society. It reminds us to look beyond the surface and recognize the humanity in everyone we encounter. But why is this message so important? Why does it strike a chord with so many people? To understand its significance, we must delve into the lessons embedded in Maggie's experience and explore how they apply to our own lives. Lesson 1. Appearances can be deceptive. One of the most striking aspects of Maggie's story is how quickly she was judged based on her appearance. Blake Thompson, the manager of the luxury car dealership, made assumptions about her financial status simply because she wore a simple dress and worn shoes. He dismissed her as someone who didn't belong in his showroom, failing to see her true worth. This behavior reflects a broader societal issue, the tendency to equate outward appearances with inner value. We live in a world where people are often judged by their clothing, cars, homes, and even their social media profiles. These superficial markers of success can create false perceptions, leading us to overlook qualities like kindness, intelligence, and resilience. Maggie's story challenges us to question these assumptions. It reminds us that appearances are not always indicative of someone's capabilities or character. True worth lies beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered by those who take the time to look deeper. Lesson 2. Kindness over judgment. When Maggie returned to the dealership with James, she had every reason to be angry or vindictive. After all, she had been humiliated in front of strangers simply because Blake judged her unfairly. But instead of retaliating, Maggie chose kindness. She calmly explained her experience and expressed hope that Blake would learn from his mistake. This act of grace highlights an important lesson. Kindness has the power to transform even the most negative situations. By choosing compassion over anger, Maggie demonstrated strength and maturity. Her actions not only helped Blake recognize his error, but also inspired him to change. In our own lives, we often encounter situations where we feel wronged or misunderstood. Maggie's story encourages us to respond with kindness rather than judgment. It reminds us that forgiveness and understanding can pave the way for growth, not just for ourselves, but also for those who have wronged us. Lesson 3. True worth is defined by actions. Throughout the story, James Collins exemplifies what it means to live with integrity. Despite his immense wealth and status, he remains humble and grounded. He treats everyone with respect, whether they are billionaires or everyday individuals, and values people for their actions rather than their appearances. James's behavior contrasts sharply with Blake's initial attitude at the dealership. While Blake judged Maggie based on superficial qualities, James recognized her inner strength and supported her unconditionally. His actions remind us that true worth is not about what we own or how we look. It is about how we treat others. This lesson is particularly relevant in today's world, where materialism often overshadows deeper values. Maggie and James's story challenges us to redefine success, not as a measure of wealth or status, but as a reflection of our character and actions. Lesson 4. Redemption is possible. Blake's journey from arrogance to humility is another powerful aspect of this story. At first, he dismisses Maggie without a second thought, relying on stereotypes to judge her worth. But when confronted by James and Maggie, he begins to reflect on his behavior and recognize his flaws. Rather than ignoring his mistake or doubling down on his arrogance, Blake chooses to change. He starts volunteering at community events and working to treat all customers with respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived wealth. Over time, he transforms into a better person, not just in his professional life, but also in his personal interactions. Blake's redemption reminds us that it is never too late to change. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we respond to them. By acknowledging our flaws and committing to growth, we can become better versions of ourselves and inspire others to do the same. Lesson 5. The ripple effect of kindness. One of the most beautiful aspects of this story is how Maggie's kindness creates a ripple effect that touches everyone involved. Her decision to forgive Blake inspires him to change his behavior, not just toward her, but toward all future customers at the dealership. Her actions also reinforce James's values, strengthening their bond as a couple. This ripple effect extends beyond the individuals directly involved in the story. Word of what happened spreads throughout the community, serving as a cautionary tale about prejudice and judgment based on appearances. It encourages others to rethink their own biases and strive for fairness in their interactions. Kindness has an incredible ability to multiply itself when shared. Maggie's story reminds us that even small acts of compassion can have far-reaching impacts, transforming lives and fostering positive change in society. Applying these lessons in our lives. The lessons from Maggie's story are not confined to luxury car dealerships or interactions between billionaires and managers. They apply universally across all aspects of life. In personal relationships, treat your loved ones with kindness and respect, valuing them for who they are rather than what they own or how they look. In professional settings, avoid making snap judgments about colleagues or clients based on appearances. Focus on their skills, contributions, and character instead. In everyday interactions, practice empathy when encountering strangers, whether it's a cashier at a store or someone asking for help on the street, and recognize their humanity. In self-reflection, acknowledge your own biases and work actively to overcome them. Strive for fairness in all your decisions. Conclusion: a call to action. At its core, Maggie Collins's story teaches us that true worth lies not in outward appearances, but in inner character, the qualities that define who we are as human beings. It challenges us to look beyond superficial markers of success and recognize the value in everyone we meet. But this message is more than just a reminder. It is a call to action, a challenge for each of us to live with integrity and compassion every day, to treat others with respect regardless of their circumstances, to choose kindness over judgment even when it feels difficult, to see beyond appearances and appreciate people for their actions rather than their possessions. By embracing these values, we can create a world where true worth is celebrated, not as something tied to wealth or status, but as something rooted in humanity itself.